As many of you know, the highest tier in my Patreon allows people to commission a video to be made by me. And as such, today's video was selected by Bloodwolfmon. They wanted me to make an honest review of the anime sRain, which, let's just say this is going to be an interesting video. If you enjoy this video and want to see more content from me in the future, be sure to leave a like and subscribe to the channel and click the bell for more content going forward. I know it can be a bit of a hassle, but if you don't actually click the bell and select all notifications, you won't always be notified when I post. You know, cause YouTube is a little bit broken. Of course, if you would like to suggest a video like Bloodwolfmon did in the future, you can also support me on Patreon through the link in the description. Finally, there will probably be some spoilers for sRain in this video, but that's probably fine. So without further ado, let's get into it. Now, let me preface this by saying that if I'm going to review an anime, I will be 100% honest about my opinions about that anime. There is no point in me making a video where I just tell lies or fake how I feel to appease whoever commissioned the video, because if that was the case, I would just skip watching the anime, throw up the Wikipedia page, and spew out some junk about how great it is in general to make them happy. There's no point to that though, so if I sound a little bit mean or negative during this review, and you think it isn't fair to Bloodwolfmon, I'm giving my honest opinion, and this is exactly what he asked for. And I know if I have to give a warning like that at the beginning of a review, it's probably a little bit telling of how I feel. sRain is an anime that, despite its very 90s aesthetic, was released in 2003 and produced by Studio Bones, which puts it in great company with another 2003 Studio Bones property which you might have heard of, called Fullmetal Alchemist. This had my hopes up pretty high right off the bat. I mean, I love FMA enough that I even have a truth tattoo, but sRain is... well, it's not Fullmetal Alchemist, which is fine, most shows aren't, but what sRain is, though, can only really be described as what I would call the Deviantart of anime, maybe minus the horny parts of Deviantart. But either way, let's cover the issues that I have with the story first, then we can get into what I think is done well and more character-based stuff. In its simplest form, the story of sRain follows 4 wolves who are searching for paradise and following the scent of lunar flowers. The issue is, sRain is nothing simple. Firstly, paradise is never really openly defined for the majority of the series. It's just this ambiguous place that may or may not exist, which all wolves are drawn towards in their lives. At some points, the story seems to be angling towards the idea of paradise being something that you find for yourself, that kind of motif like the home is where the heart is sort of thing. However, it is later established that it is indeed a real place. Sort of. It's kind of an event, though? It's difficult to explain in general, even having seen the entire story, which, let's be real, not a great sign. But this idea of searching for paradise itself isn't too bad as the core first story, and I do typically like these adventures to find these mythological or legendary places or things. Those can be really fun. Of course, this is also coupled with some sort of legend or prophecy in sRain which insists that a wolf, along with the Flower Maiden, will be the one who is able to open the gates to paradise. I will get into what the Flower Maiden is later. Now, I've mentioned wolves a few times so far, and while you wouldn't really think that wolf is something that you would need to define, oh god, is it ever something that you need to define. In the world of sRain, humanity evolves from wolves, which, okay. However, some people in the modern age are still wolves, and can turn into wolves whenever they want. But also, they are always wolves, but just perceived by the world around them as humans. But they're also actually turning into people, but they're still wolves. This was one of the most disorienting parts of the entire series for me. You'd have these shots where characters are talking to people, it would cut away for a split second, jump back to them, and they'd be wolves instead of people. There was never a transformation effect or notification, nothing that really showed this was about to happen. They would just be wolves instead, and I'm not sure why this lack of visual effect was chosen, honestly, but whatever the reason is, it would completely take me out of these serious moments because it would be so jarring or funny every time it happened. Like just boom, surprise wolf, where you're supposed to be feeling very sad. And while we're talking about the visuals of the series, let's talk about how the show looks overall. It's pretty on par with other Studio Bones works from the time, and it's really well illustrated, the animation is super clean, but one of the biggest deterrents of the show for me in general was the color palette. Everything was so drab. And yes, I understand that it was intentional for building this grungy world that was approaching an apocalypse that the story was aiming to present, but with a series that's moving as slowly as this one was, the colors chosen just supplemented that issue to an extreme. Everything was gray, black, brown, a rusty red, or a muted white. Every color was so dull. It just made this beautiful 90s aesthetic that the show had become so boring and drab. God, it made things feel like they were crawling sometimes and made it so much harder to take an interest in the show itself. On the topic of pacing, yes, it is extraordinarily slow, which is typically right up my alley. Admittedly, I love slow burn shows usually, but of the 26 episodes of the anime, it took me to the closing arc, around 21 episodes in, to really build any interest in the show. And that's not even touching the idea of the 4-episode streak right in the middle that tells the story so far from each of the main wolves' perspective, which is quite literally useless airtime. Recapping 15 episodes over 4 episodes, all through different lenses, just feels like such a waste of episode space. Honestly, I wouldn't say that I really started to enjoy the show itself until episode 27. Now, you might have caught a disconnect there, because I said the anime was only 26 episodes long, but 27 was the turning point for me. And that's because, while episode 26 is the finale of the anime, literally nothing comes to a close at that point. It sort of does, but there's no catharsis, nothing feels really finished. We don't know what Paradise really is at this point. Everything is open-ended still. Instead, we have to look to the 4 episodes of OVA for the true ending, for the actual definition of what Paradise is, for the conclusion of character arcs, all of that. Which means that the OVAs, which stands for Original Video Animations, which typically are not part of the actual story, become so important to Wolf's Rain and are so well done that I feel like the series needs to have them included to even be considered completed in itself. Nothing is resolved without these extra episodes, and if I didn't learn that these 4 episodes existed at the last moment, literally because I was so in shock that episode 26 didn't resolve anything that I had to look things up separately, then I would have probably hated this series. Overall, I'd probably give the first 26 episodes of Wolf Rain, the actual anime, a 3 out of 10 for myself personally. However, when looking at the OVAs specifically, I would give them an 8 or 9. They redeem so much and give such a good ending for the series that it almost feels like they don't belong in the series because their quality is so much higher. Wolf's Rain as a series has a reputation of being extremely confusing and of causing people to drop it. But those who make it to the end often really enjoy it, and I think that can largely be attributed to the powerful and emotional OVAs at the end of the series. It is very often the case that endings with these strong and powerful emotional scenes can completely erase and replace the actual quality of a series in many people's minds. Shows that come to mind when I'm thinking about this sort of thing are Clannad, or even the namesake of my channel, AxelBeats, both of which are incredibly loved by me, but in general are very slow and not that great, but have these really impactful endings that just stick with you. I love the Wolf's Rain OVAs, I just don't have the same level of fondness for the rest of the series at all. I do, however, really enjoy the music in Wolf's Rain. While the OP isn't really my kind of music, the OST in general throughout the anime is actually really gorgeous. I'm probably using some of it in the background of this video if you can hear any of that. It's really nice, super charming, and honestly, I would listen to it just on its own. Okay though, so who are the wolves that we're traveling to Paradise with? Our 4 main characters are Kiba, Sume, Hige, and Toboy, and each is kind of just presented as an archetypal character at first. However, within the last 5 to 10 episodes of the series, they're all fleshed out in their own ways, which is fine. But this is another thing that I found a little bit strange about the series as well. Wolf's Rain often feels like a plot-driven story that's trying to be a character-driven one. It wants us to be deeply invested in the wolves and feel like part of their pack, but when we barely know anything more than their names for literally 80% of the series, it just feels disconnected and odd. Again, the OVAs are where each character shines the most and gets the biggest doses of development, which is a shame because it was done in such a great way that I feel like that information and that focus on their characters, if it had been done earlier, would have gone a long way in making me like the series more than I did. Anyways, Kiba is our de facto leader of the wolf pack, and despite being the slowest to be introduced to us properly, he is our primary protagonist. As a whole, he dislikes people at first, even refusing to take on his human form because it goes against his pride as a wolf, a kind of thinking which is pretty detrimental and ends up getting him captured. However, once he comes into contact with the other wolves, he slowly realizes that ideals like pride sometimes have to take a backseat to the reality of the requirements of survival. Kiba has the strongest connection to Paradise and the Flower Maiden Cheza, which I mentioned in the prophecy earlier, but we still have a little bit until we can talk about her. Kiba is drawn to Paradise through a form of instinct that the others seem to lack in some way or another. However, this can at times appear to be an obsession. If I had a subscriber for every time he put Paradise or the well-being of Cheza ahead of his own safety or the safety of his friends, I would be the next PewDiePie. Our second in command is Sume. He is basically the Sasuke of the series. Very much the I don't need friends kind of character. He feels like they designed him intentionally to be the cool one, but he just kind of ends up feeling cheesy because of it, like we're aware of what they're trying to do. Honestly, he and Kiba are kind of meant to mirror each other, I think, but they both fall victim to the same intentionally cool kind of writing that's just very surface level, and I just never really felt a pull to their characters because of it. Maybe except for the last episode of the OVA, where I think that Sume really shines quite a lot and I started to like his character, but it wasn't like there was much of the series left to really go with that. Hige is probably the wolf with the most personality in our group. He is pretty carefree and less attached to the idea of pride than maybe Kiba and Sume are, and this allows him to be a good bit of levity throughout most of the series where everyone else is very serious or sad, a trait which is extremely effectively used when we learn about his backstory in the final arc of the story. And rounding out our main quartet is Toboe. Toboe is a jelly bean. He has this innate care for humans despite being a wolf. He's very naive and genuinely kind, and to me it made him one of the best aspects of the show. When everyone else is just a black hole of happiness and hope, being intentionally gritty and dark, Toboe is just kinda there hoping that everyone has a good day and reminding everyone to stay hydrated, a sense of genuine kindness that was really needed in the story. As far as secondary characters, we really have only 3 that are super important to the story to cover that I'm going to talk about briefly here. Firstly, the Flower Maiden Cheza, who I mentioned earlier. She was actually made in a lab, and much like our boys who are wolves, she can also appear human, but she's a plant? I don't know, just don't question it, go with it. Just know that she is also vital for the opening of Paradise just as much as the wolves are. We also had Quent, a man who believes that his village was destroyed by wolves and harbors a massive grudge against them. He was probably one of the most interesting characters in the entire show. I kind of wish the show was about him, but that's just not how it played out. Anyways, Quent hunts down the wolves with the help of his dog, Blue, who turns out to be half-wolf herself, and is the best character in the entire series. Jesus fucking Christ, I need you to please ruin my life, Blue. And then we have our antagonists, very clichédly called the nobles, who are wanting to open Paradise for themselves and not for the wolves. These guys suck, and not in the way like they're really bad people. Literally, I've seen more personality in a box of soap. Their leader, Darcia, has been cursed and has a wolf's eye, and he's also part wolf or something. It's all pretty murky, but really he's just kind of the peak of the Deviantart writing in this show. Now, I don't want you to have the wrong idea. sRain definitely has its moments, but it more often just feels like people kept throwing ideas that a middle schooler might find really cool at a wall and hoping that it worked. Some of my favorites of this I've talked about, but let's get a quick list going. Wolf people, a prophecy, Paradise, flower people, a villain with a wolf's eye, a walrus fight, mind control, illusion realms, talking owls, and my personal favorite, a Native American man using a machine gun on horseback to fight a medieval knight who has an axe that shoots laser beams. Like, the show just has a lot going on, if you didn't catch that by now. And that's always. It always has something going on. Despite how slow it feels while you're watching, It jumps between topics and themes so quickly that things just kind of blur together. I think that's probably because Paradise remains to be this ethereal thing that never really gets clearer, so we don't have this sense of progress at all through the entire show, despite how fast we're actually interacting with the various parts of the world, which each have their own thematic design and which rarely flow into each other naturally. Like I said, it just has a lot going on. So final thoughts time. sRain has great illustrations and some amazing animation. However, they're kind of marred by the constantly drab and boring color palette that just disconnects you from the show. The series is conflicted between being a character and plot-driven story, and even when it does figure out what it wants to be, it's just kind of a clusterfuck of confusing plot points, poor pacing, and underutilized characters. I think a lot of people who watch this will actually enjoy it, especially if they make it to the end of the OVAs, or if they watch it while they're in, let's call it the Deviantart age group. But it just didn't work for me at all. And again, that's except for the OVAs, I think those are phenomenal on their own. But honestly, if this show appeals to you at all, like even 30%, I think you would really enjoy it if you stuck through it. But if it's not something that you're immediately drawn into, the slow progression, needless complexity, and general dullness for around the first 20 episodes of the series just isn't gonna let you get into the show very easily. But for now, that's where I think I'm going to end this review. If you did enjoy this video, be sure to leave a like and subscribe to the channel for more content in the future. You can also consider supporting me over on Patreon, like Bloodwolfmon did for this video. I am so sorry I didn't enjoy the anime you suggested, but I think an honest review is probably better than just one where I make things up to appease you. Hopefully you agree. On that note though, I do want to thank the rest of our patrons with our Daiokai, Bloodwolfmon, Iffy Babes, Ikerochu, and Jacob Wiley, our Yokai, Amelia Hellman, NL Cruz, Janice Not Janice, Joker Rose, Lucifina Akuma, and our Hanyo, Anthony Hogan, Brittany K, Kiwi Dog, Love the Kiwi, Michael Greycoat, Mochi Num Num, Morrigan E. Wolf, Nega Kitty, Randy Moseyman, Samantha Olsen, Savage Camel, Simon Electric, Suki Neko, and Ziv. Thank you guys so much for watching, and until next time, remember to stay excellent.